Good day. My name is Leighton Naidu. My student number is 21204549. Today, we welcome you to the presentation, which is titled Bridging Theory and Practice Communicating Inclusive Education for South African Schools. In South Africa, inclusive education is more than a policy trend. It's a response to our country's history of exclusion, inequality, and segregation under apartheid. Today we have a poster which is shown below the screen as it reflects inclusive education, which matters because it offers a pathway to equity and justice in our schools. According to INSCO, reference 2005, inclusive education is a process which one that involves identifying and removing barriers to learning, increases participation, valuing diversity as a strength. And today, this presentation explores two contested definitions of inclusion and how they affect policy, teacher training, and learner support. I'll also share practical strategies for educators, parents, and policymakers to promote inclusive education in schools. Let's start with the first definition, which is inclusion as a physical placement. As you see below, this view assumes that placing learners with disabilities in mainstream classrooms is enough to call a school inclusive. However, inclusive is not just about being present, it's about participation and learning meaningfully. For example, a learner with a hearing impairment may be enrolled in a mainstream school, but sit in silence during lessons because there's no interpreter. This form of inclusion is tokenistic, as it often violates the principle of removing barriers and increasing participation. This definition also leads to policy gaps where learners are placed in schools without adequate teacher training or support systems. The second broader definition views inclusion as a systematic transformation, which means changing school cultures, teaching methods, and policies to support all learners, not just those with disabilities. Today we look at as diversity as a resource, which is not only a problem, it recognizes that learners may face barriers due to language, poverty, and also trauma. For example, a school might use multilingual teaching according to a flexible curricula and trauma-sensitive practices to ensure that no learner is left behind. The approach requires a full commitment of school staff, leadership, and communities, supported by strong policy like the White Paper 6 and the DBE's 2010 guidelines for full service school. Today we list, as you see below, the practical recommendations for educators and parents. For educators, this means using universal design for learning to cater for different learning styles. As a teacher, you need to accommodate all types of learners from various groups or backgrounds. Encourage peer collaboration so learners can support each other. As an educator, you can also provide study group sessions where learners can interact with each other. By being proactive in identifying and addressing learner barriers in the classrooms, can also be consistent in inclusive education. For parents, you can advocate for individual support plans for learners with additional needs. You can join school governing bodies to help shape inclusive policies and raise awareness. But as a parent, where you get involved in your child's curriculum and work hand in hand with the educator and school staff, you begin to focus more and help develop your child's needs and educational wants. These efforts work best when teachers and parents collaborate to ensure each learner feels valued and supported. The practical recommendations for policymakers also play a vital role in making inclusion a reality, as they must allocate funding for full service schools and district based support teams. They must provide ongoing in service training to help teachers meet diverse needs, ensure alignment between classroom practice and policy goals, which is outlined in documents like the White Paper 6 and UNESCO. Without the resources and clear guidance, even the most committed teachers can struggle to implement inclusive practices. As we go further into inclusive education, it's not just a physical access, but an active participation for all types of learners, where they all want to achieve and grow. We looked at two definitions. One focuses narrowly on placement and the other on system-wide transformation. INSCO reminds us that inclusion is a process, one that values diversity and requires our ongoing collaboration. Teachers, parents, and policymakers each have a vital role, which occurs that creating inclusive environment can help learners from diverse backgrounds. Inclusive education is everyone's responsibility. Teachers must create inclusive classrooms where parents must advocate and participate, and policymakers must provide leadership, training, and funding. Remember, my call to action is to ask your school to support all types of learners, regardless of their backgrounds or language barriers. Challenges can be resolved as practices and implementation can be used. Promote inclusion as a shared goal, where it can help assist learners from various diversity groups. As we look at, inclusion is about the presence, the participation, and achievement of all learners. Inclusion ensures that all learners are present in the school. They have access to all learning environments. They need to participate meaningfully in school life and learning, and to achieve their full and graduate potential. This focuses especially on learners who are most at risk of exclusion, such as with disabilities from marginalized communities or in poverty. Diversity is viewed as a resource for the learning of all, where children from, as I mentioned before, are differences in ability and the background of learning style, which are not seen as problems. Instead, diversity is valued as something of enriched learning for everyone, whereas teachers are not adequately equipped to teach learners from diverse groups. But should strategies be implemented where teachers can learn effectively, which can encourage collaboration and peer learning in a mixed ability settings. Inclusive education is linked to a broader school and school development. As inclusion cannot succeed in isolation, it must be a part of a whole school development, which in order this can provide to build inclusive schools for towards the entire world and potentially in South Africa. Remember, the difference is not a deficit, it's a strength. As Anko says, inclusive education works best when we view diversity as a resource, which focuses on increasing participation. As I mentioned in the poster and the information that I just spoke about, we need to promote inclusion as a shared goal. Thank you.